Before I get started, I do consulting on where you can move. I'll work with you to find the perfect place for you to move to. There's more information at the end of the video about that. Now let's get started. There's no place on the planet like Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, the center of democracy, home to all of our branches of the federal government, home to the Supreme Court, and home to our sitting president. Our history and our future all have a place here. We're going to drive around parts of D.C. and look around a little bit. We're going to see some nice areas, some bad parts of town, and discuss problems that exist here, just like they do in every other American city. Right now, we're in an area of town called the Mall. Here are all the monuments and important buildings where laws are written and enforced. It's a very nice part of town. In fact, most of the heart of D.C. is very pleasant. There's tourists all over, and locals come down to frolic on the grounds or to dine. D.C. sure has changed a lot. They've gentrified parts of town that were ruined by riots 50 years ago. Many neighborhoods like this were in a bad place in the 1980s, and D.C.'s population plummeted by 25% by 1990 due to crime and a crack epidemic. In 1992, Washington, D.C. was the murder capital of America. But most places you drive through now have completely recovered, and it's super expensive to live here again. There's nothing under $1 million on this street. There's a bunch of young millennials moving into neighborhoods like this. How they can afford it, I don't know. Most cannot. One of our nation's capital's issues is its economic gap. It ranks in the top 10 of all cities with the biggest gap in income equality. The racial disparity here is also quite evident. All of the upscale Tony neighborhoods like this are white, and the ghetto hoods are all black. There's very little working poor or middle class here. Now, I didn't explore every square inch of this city, and I'm sure there's parts of it that resemble the old DC, where it's dirty and run down and where the criminals prey, but I didn't see it, and I'm glad. The far east side of town, across the Anacostia River on the fringes of DC, this is where it's the worst. This whole area was the center of the crime and the drugs and was completely ghetto. Today, it too is going through an urban renewal of sorts. If you left DC 20 years ago and came back, you wouldn't even recognize the place. After a big turnaround of 2 decades of growth, things here seem to have peaked for now. DC's population declined by 3% in the last year. And like every other major city, Washington, D.C. has a huge homeless crisis on its hands. Scattered throughout the city are homeless encampments like these. Some are vacated, others house people who have been here for a long time. Most of the homeless I talked to said they were waiting for affordable housing. For some, it was a many years wait. In the meantime, they go back and forth between cheap motels and shelters, accepting handouts and finding a way to get by. This homeless man has a decent government job just blocks from the park where he's camped, but he can't afford rent. He said there is free housing available all over the place, but people camped in the park where he lives refuse it. So, you were saying that there's free housing available?
Yeah. So if, say you showed up and I seen you were in a tent, I could send you down to 24 there and they would get you free housing. So you would be able to stay in the house for a year. If you don't have a job or whatnot, they don't even badger you. But if, say you got a job during that year, the next year, they would probably give you free housing again, but they might ask up for $100 or $200 a month, depending on how your job is.
Just a block away, there was this guy who's living in a park for about 3 years now. He said he became homeless because of online stalking. He said he thinks DC attracts so many homeless people because of its loose laws.
And then like I said, in other ways, a lot of these people come from different areas too. So like half of the people here come from like different states.
Why DC?
Because the thing I understand is that we pay for, like there are homeless people from other states that can come here and get housing here. Me personally, I remember during the winter 2 years ago, I tried to go into Virginia and go to their shelter, and they told me I couldn't stay in their shelter for more than 3 days. I said, well, why? They said, well, because you're not a Virginia resident, you don't have an ID for Virginia. I said, well, that doesn't make sense, because in DC, anybody can come from anywhere and go in the shelter. You're telling me I can't come to Virginia and do that? So DC seems to be nicer to people coming from other states or other places who need services.
And then there's Sharon. She's been out here so long, she has an entire living room in her tent. Her goal is to preach to other homeless people until she feels it's time to get proper housing. She's out here by choice.
She, in order to order a village down this way, a encampment, she said, I'm bringing the bulldozers out. If you're not out of there, I'm bulldozing through. There was there was a much larger camp down there months ago. And I guess there was only a handful of tents left. And unbeknownst to them, the bulldozer proceeded to pick up one of the tents, and a man screamed and said, hey, I'm in here. They almost killed a dude. And now she's making that same threat again. So everybody's like, so they're busting their butt. Everybody, all these, organizations and the government. I'm not going for government housing. There's my caseworker is getting us all in some other kind of organization that's not, because I'm not in the welfare system. No, thank you. That's what the administration wants to do. Make us a welfare state, the whole country.
While in DC, I walked around at night. It's totally clean, and to be honest, pretty dead. This is just blocks from the White House. It's easy to feel very safe this close to the Capitol, but you never feel like you're alone. Like there's probably people watching every square inch from the tops of these hotels and office buildings. I walked around past big buildings that looked very important. The columnar designs were very impressive. And you're always reminded about politics, no matter where you go in DC. I also went to the top of the W Hotel to get a neat view of the White House and surrounding area. Lots of people up here were dressed up like they were very important. And they played Jason Derulo a lot up here, which is weird. Some would say the worst part of DC isn't the poverty or the crime or the racial inequality. It's the politics itself, the politicians themselves, the guts of the place, and the reason for its existence. There's not a lot of faith in the people who run this place anymore. And as DC gets more toxic and divided and completely removed from the realities of all Americans, there's still going to be a stain on this town that all the gentrifying in the world can never remove. Okay, YouTube, well, we have a special guest. Guess who's back? Cal Thomas, the author and syndicated columnist and journalist that everybody loves. How's it going, Cal?
Yeah, you should read my hate mail.
Oh, I know. I get it too. Most of the people that watch my channel agree with you and I politically. So,
well, that's nice.
So I wanted to chat with you a little bit about Washington, D.C. I was there a few weeks ago and kind of drove around. A lot of people have never been to Washington, D.C. They don't know really what it's like. They've seen pictures or videos. But, you were born in Washington, D.C. in the 40s. I wanted to get some perspective from you. First of all, how has Washington, D.C. changed since you were born there? And then we can talk a little bit about how the politics has changed.
Well, it's the 1940s, not the 1840s. I want to be clear about that. Well, human nature never changes. Obviously, television, the advent of social media, the rapid responses that we can have now that we didn't have back then. But there are other things, too. People don't know each other anymore in Washington. They used to have parties, and people of different persuasions would be invited. They get to know each other. Spouses would get to know each other. Human relationships were considered important. And now they fly in on late Monday and they vote on legislation that they haven't read, most of them, these gargantuan bills, which are loaded with pork. Nobody knows anybody anymore. And then they go home on Thursday afternoon and they fundraise. The objective now is just to stay in office. And it's all about power, not promoting the general welfare. And our debt now is at $30 trillion. And as I say in my latest book, America's Expiration Date, no country has been able to sustain that kind of debt. And you add to that the open borders and the hundreds of thousands of people flowing in here, we are in serious, serious trouble. So while there's always been a contentious atmosphere between Republicans and Democrats, back when I was starting out as a reporter, people were mostly more friendly to each other and treated each other as fellow Americans. Now we treat each other the way we ought to be treating the Russian leadership.
Yeah. At what point did DC change? Do you remember the year, the decade when it went from, working together and America first to infighting and selfishness?
Yeah, I think, the Vietnam War, where we were lied to by Lyndon Johnson, and then followed up by Watergate, more lies from the Nixon administration. I think that created a certain cynicism, not only in journalism, but in the country. And then when you add the fundraising letters, the social media, you raise money off of negatives. I asked a fundraiser once, how come you never send out a positive letter of what you're doing with people's money? And he said, you can't raise money on a positive. So you've always got to be in trouble. The other side is evil. Send me $25. And then the other side, so-called, says, no, they're evil. Send me $25. So the check's clear and everybody's happy. So I think there's not only a deepening cynicism in our political system, but there's also a growing realization, I hope, that government is no longer the answer. Too many of us have turned to government as a first resource and not a last resort. And that's why the debt grows. And that's why we, the people, have been subsumed into you, the government.
So how do we fix this problem?
Well, I think you have to start locally. Number one, you have to, as Biden would say, you have to get your kids out of these re-education camps called public schools and liberal universities. We don't send our troops to foreign countries to be trained there. We train them here. Many parents discovered that they could teach their kids at home better than they were being taught in their local public school. And then you can't send them to these universities that teach revisionist American history, undermine their faith and values, and expect them to come out as American loving citizens. So I think it starts in each individual home. I remember something Barbara Bush said years ago. If you have children, they must come first. Our success as a nation and your success as a family depends less on what happens in the White House and more on what happens in your house. So we have the ultimate power in this if we will simply exercise it and not put our faith in princes and kings.
Yeah, those are interesting points. I think what I meant was how do we fix the political fighting and the way DC has become, where it's not about America first, it's an individual selfish thing, and it's so the sides are fighting and nobody gets along and everyone's out for just trying to stay elected. Like, do we need like a political upheaval in a sense? Do we need to vote everybody on, drain the swamp, as Trump once said? I mean, what do we need to do?
Well, you're not going to change it from the top unless you change it from the bottom. You've got to change attitudes, this idea that government owes you things. In the recent Medicare open enrollment last fall, there were 4 key words that define a lot of what government has become: free, entitlement, deserve, and benefit. Now, what I'm entitled to is liberty. I want government to be there if I need it, but at the end, I'm responsible for myself, living within my means, investing properly so I can take care of myself in my old age, getting married before you have kids, don't take drugs, obey the law. All these things used to be what Thomas Jefferson called self-evident truths. But now there are no truths anymore. All truth is subjected. You have your truth, I have my truth. Even if they're opposite, as long as they make you and I feel good, it's okay. So I think you look at the big picture, and you're not going to have that much of an effect unless you vote intelligently for the right people. Now, I would say get together with people in your neighborhood, your church or whatever, and make sure they're informed on what the real issues are. Most people don't pay attention. Democracy, a constitutional republic, is not the natural state of humankind. Otherwise, there would be more like us around the world. Dictatorship, denial of women's rights, censorship, lack of a free press. These are more in common than in the United States. Reagan used to say we're only one generation away from losing it all, and I think that's right.
Yeah, Washington, D.C. used to be a place that inspired many around the world, and now it's mocked around the world, and that's just a shame.
Well, I think D.C. should stand for dysfunctional city.
That's right. How much has wokeness ruined politics, do you think?
Oh, I think it's been a major contributor. See, people are afraid to stand up to bullies. And when you don't stand up to a bully, you just encourage them to bully more. Now, you look at what Ron DeSantis has done, the governor of Florida. He stood up against these Disney woke people, saying we're not going to allow California values to be imposed in Florida. People like that. But so many big corporations are afraid of these small groups of people, and they are small groups, who get on TV and threaten them with boycotts or call them racists or bigots or intolerant. And so it's kind of a sophisticated version of Al Capone Chicago and protection money. These mafia guys go around the dry cleaners and say, hey, we're going to protect you against having your place bombed, but it's going to cost you so much per month. And if they don't pay, the place gets bombed. So this is the game that's being played right now, tearing down of statues, renaming buildings after George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. But people are starting to rebel. Look what happened in San Francisco, where school board members in that very liberal city were recalled. Loudoun County, Virginia, same thing. Parents started taking over.
Yeah. What's it going to take to the rift between the left and the right is growing almost to a point that you get stagnation because you can't get anything done because people are just voting against things just for the sake of doing that. Are we ever going to be able to work together politically like we used to, or are we well past that?
Well, in some ways, we may be well past that, but I think we have to win the issue. And conservative values have worked throughout history. And instead of just trying to prove that those who are conservatives and Republicans are not what the left calls us, racist, bigots, intolerant, and all of this, it's the other side. I hate to use that, but it's the left, the secular progressives, the woke people who have ruined education, who have ruined communication, who are ruining culture, and who are ruining foreign policy, who are ruining our economy. And it's those conservative values that have done the opposite to all of those things. So we've got all of these issues on our side: lower debt, less spending, more personal accountability and responsibility. These are conservative values. We don't have to defend ourselves against anybody. Well, we should hold the other side accountable.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to ask, like, is there a way both sides can get along? And you went on the attack.
Well, it's not really an attack, Nick. It's just a fact. I mean, getting along shouldn't be the goal. Winning the issue should be the goal. And when you win the issue, then you draw more people to you. But as long as you're on defense, as long as you're trying to disprove a negative, then you're never going to win the issue. And the secular progressives do this all the time and very effectively. Look at the language Biden is using. We need to impose more tax on billionaires so they'll pay their fair share. For over 40 years, Democrats have been using this phrase, fair share. They never tell us what fair share is. And by the way, the federal government takes in more tax dollars than at any time in history. It's not revenue that's lacking. It's self-control when it comes to spending that's lacking. And those are the kinds of things that Republicans and conservatives ought to be saying. All of these programs you people have passed, all of these agencies you and, yes, some Republican presidents have created, have they achieved the objective that they were designed to achieve? If so, and if they can't be done cheaper by the private sector, we keep them. If not, we get rid of them. That's what you do in business. But only government is, again, as Reagan used to say, the only proof of eternal life in Washington is a government program.
It's a shame that DC has become a place of intolerance and infighting when the benefit of the country is not the number one priority right now. It's all about individuals and parties. And
you talk about the poor and the homeless. The Great Society was supposed to fix that. Lyndon Johnson promised in 1965 that all of these bills, most of which had not been read, and he didn't read them as he was signing them one after another, was going to eliminate poverty in America. Today, there are as many poor people as there were then. So we've spent over $11 trillion on anti-poverty programs. It isn't working. Now, in business, if you're spending a lot of money on something that isn't working, you try something different. But in government, you just keep going on and spending more because it's not about results, it's about intentions. Well, you know about that old phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So all I'm saying is hold them accountable. They promised all this stuff. It hasn't worked. And when you get to things like alcoholism and drug addiction, these are personal things. Nobody's forcing stuff into your arm or into your mouth. You take those things. Nobody's forcing you to not work. But we have a dependency culture now with more than half of the country now pays taxes. and the other half doesn't. More than half of the country earns a check, and the other half gets a check. And that creates a dependent culture, which the Democrats and the left are perfectly happy for, because they're the party of government, and they say to voters, "Hey, you better not vote for those evil conservatives because they'll take your check away." You remember the Gingrich and Clinton welfare reform bill in the early 90s. The left said, "Oh no, if we reform welfare, people are going to starve in the streets." Well, guess what? They didn't. When they realized the gravy train was no longer stopping at their mailbox, they went out and got jobs. And that's what we need to focus on. Government is a last resort, not a first resource.
Cal Thomas, America's expiration date, the fall of empires and superpowers, and the future of the United States. I appreciate your time, sir, and I think a lot of people are going to take what you said to heart. So,
thank you, Nick. Good to be with you.
Are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. And I can also help you find your new house too. Email me and I'll work with you on not just helping you figure out where to move, but I can help you find your perfect home too. That's right. I know awesome, reliable agents all over the country, and I'd love to connect you to somebody who can help you search for that perfect home. Hey everyone. So it's pretty clear by now that elected leaders aren't going to help you. If you don't like what you saw in this video, demanding change won't work. You're going to have to do it on your own. If you want to be safe and want your community to be a place where people want to live, you're going to have to clean the place up yourselves. You're going to have to work with your friends and neighbors to lower crime. Politicians clearly don't care as much anymore. It's up to us.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.